Hello, everyone. I see that some of you all are connecting to audio. If you wouldn't mind, just for the panel discussion portion of this, if you could mute yourselves, that would be greatly appreciated. We will have Q&A. We will also be moderating the chat. So if you have any questions as the panel discusses the topic, please feel free to drop those questions in the chat. Once we have that Q&A, we will, because we have a small group, we will open up and allow everyone to speak freely. But just for purposes of the panel discussion, we'll keep everybody on mute. And we'll be starting shortly. I'm going to give a few folks time to roll in, as there's a couple of folks in the waiting room. So I will give people a little bit to roll in, and we'll probably start like 401, 402. So thank you guys for your patience. All right, I think folks will roll in as we get through the introduction. So we'll start just to be respectful of everyone's time. Thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Danielle Crocker. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the Assistant Director of Employer Engagement and Diversity Recruiting here at DePaul within the Career Center. I am responsible for working with employers, like some of the individuals on the panel, to connect them with students, and also have the lens of working with them on strategies to engage and recruit diverse talent. I'm also happy to be joined by my colleague on the career advising side, Annie.
Hi, all. My name is Annie Lux Goebel. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I am the student-facing branch of our business entrepreneurship and consulting community. So I am the career community advisor. You may see me in some of your career courses, as well as other academic courses. And of course, we handle all of the one-on-one and small group advising. So very happy to see you all here. And I want to thank all of our employer partners for joining us today.
Wonderful. And we also have a couple of staff and faculty who have joined us. I just want to say thank you for your support. I know that what we do here in the Career Center is supported by your work in the classroom, and we couldn't do it without you. So just wanted to say thank you for taking time. And then I'm going to ask the panel to go ahead and introduce themselves. And we're going to start with Joseph. If you could introduce yourself, give a little background of why you're on this panel, a little bit of industry information, and then we'll go to the next panelist.
Thank you, Danielle, and it's nice to meet everybody today. My name is Joseph Olalusi. I am from Chicago. I went to Cornell University, but I am for Chicago. I love DePaul, and I love being able to engage with students. I am a second-year Process Risk Consulting Associate, RSM US LLP, which is the largest middle market financial service provider globally. And it's nice to meet you all today, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Wonderful. Professor Mason, if you wouldn't mind going next.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Professor Mason. I'm in the Department or School of Accountancy at DePaul. My life in finance started after undergrad. I worked at Deloitte on in a group that is now called Valuation Services. I got an MBA in finance at the University of Chicago and then spent the next 12 years working on the buy side, primarily risk and private equity capital at JP Morgan Investment Management.
Wonderful. And Professor Thompson, if you wouldn't mind going next.
Sure. Hi, I'm Brian Thompson, a clinical professor of economics here at DePaul. And I graduated my MBA some years ago, and always thought I'd be a professor in retirement, and I guess it came early. But prior to that, I worked in trading in options trading for a number of firms here in Chicago, and did that as well as some entrepreneurial activities as well that I still do today. So,
Thank you. Carrington, would you mind going next?
Hi, everyone. My name is Carrington Homan. I went to University of Colorado Boulder, originally from Orange County, California. I studied finance. While I was in college, I had a couple internships at either finance accounting firms or public accounting firms. I joined RSM July of 2019 after graduating, and originally was based out of the San Diego office working in financial consulting. My team, we specialized in overseeing compliance at commercial and tribal casinos. In about a year and a half, I transferred to the Chicago office, which is where our headquarters are at RSM. And I now work in insurance management consulting.
Thank you.
It's nice to meet everyone.
Anthony, if you wouldn't mind going next.
Hey everyone, I'm Anthony Watkins. I'm dialing in from Atlanta, Georgia. I'm the CFO of Strategic Diversity Partners. It's a DEI consulting firm. Prior to doing this job, I've got about 20 plus years of finance and accounting experience working with companies like Elevon, which is a subsidiary of US Bank, working with McDonald's, working with smaller companies as well. And so definitely happy to join the panel.
And last but certainly not least, Andre, if you wouldn't mind.
How you doing? My name is Andre King. I'd like to apologize. I'm on my phone right now. I'm having technical difficulties, so bear with me. But I'm originally from Kansas City, Missouri. I'm currently an assistant deputy comptroller at the Office of Comptroller of the Currency. I've been in this position approximately 3 years, but I've been in this particular agency over 18, 19 years. I'm directly responsible for 21 institutions with assets ranging up to 7 billion, and directly responsible for 20 plus individuals as part of my staff. I'm excited to be here and I look forward to our conversation.
Wonderful. So I am going to kick off the panel with the very obvious question and why we are here. And I'm going to ask all of the panel to respond to this question. Can you tell me about the very first time you felt as if you were the only one in the room?
So I'll kick off because I was thinking about this after reading the questions, and I feel like I've been the only one in the room my entire life. I grew up in South Carolina my father was a military pilot who then went into commercial aviation. Growing up in school, I was always the one until I got to undergrad at North Carolina A&T, which is the nation's largest historically Black university. And I went to A&T to find myself, right? Even though all my family members had been to HBCUs. But when I was at Deloitte in New York, when I was at Chicago, and then when I got to Morgan, I was certainly always the only one in the room.
Guess I can jump in next. I'd say for me, I did my first internship for the Chicago Board Options Exchange. That was back in the day when it was very busy and very active. And I can certainly say that I was definitely the only one. I can't say that I felt like the only one just because I felt like everyone was very open to me and we were very well connected. It was quite a community. But in terms of being the only one, I was definitely the only one.
Yeah. No, go ahead, Karen.
I can jump in next. So I'd say I've always known to be the only one in the room. It's always felt very, fortunately, normal. I grew up in Orange County, California, so that's a very predominantly white community. So whether it was my classroom, my friend groups, sports teams, internships, I was always the only one. Even at University of Colorado, it wasn't much different in terms of diversity. And I would say it wasn't until I moved here a couple months ago that I started to see a little bit more Black people in professional settings, but it's still, I wouldn't say a drastic change, but maybe a small difference.
Yeah, I would say for me, growing up in Tennessee, I went to a predominantly Black high school for half of my high school career, and then just the inverse, the second half of my high school career. So I felt some glimpses of it there. And then certainly when I got to college, I started out in my accounting classes, and I was definitely the only one there, and certainly felt it. Right, that was probably the first time that I felt it and realized it. Right.
Yes, I'm from Chicago. I'm from the south side of Chicago. I grew up in Inglewood, and so I went to an all-Black high school. So the way I would answer this question is, the first time I felt like I was the only one in the room was when I wanted something outside of my community, when I wanted something outside of Chicago, when I wanted something outside of Inglewood. I started to see that there was other people that wanted that stuff that didn't look like me, and to a large degree. I went to Cornell University, 30 minutes from Canada, and anybody who goes there is going there for a reason. And I definitely, most of the classes there, I didn't see people that looked like me.
I think, Andre, did we hear from you?
Yeah. For myself, I grew up in the inner city of Kansas City, went to a historically Black college, Lincoln University in Jefferson City, Missouri. And so when I got an opportunity to get an internship here at the OCC, they sent me to Omaha for 6 months. And I think that was the first time externally and internally, because as part of my agency, we're external facing agency, we supervise national banks and federal savings associations. And so being a regulator of those institutions, you have to be in the room with individuals that don't necessarily look like you or haven't even experienced someone that look like you maybe ever in their life in small town Iowa and Nebraska. But as well as internally with some of the supervisors and managers and the opportunities that weren't given to me throughout my career. And so I think Omaha was my first glimpse of being the only one in the room internally and externally.
Thank you all for sharing all of that, because I think it's important to set the ground of how everyone has had moments where they feel like they've been the only one in the room, whether you're at the start of your career or whether you are further down the road, if you're an entrepreneur, and how that really has kind of followed you, this invisible force that's been in all of your workplace experiences. So I want to kind of talk about a little bit, these challenges that we have as minorities that are in the rooms, in spaces where we may be the only one or few, maybe one of few. I want to talk about it in terms of the challenges, but I also want to talk about in terms of the benefits. So we want to discuss both sides of it. And so I'd like to hear from, and anybody feel free to take this one, about some of the specific challenges, like the things that really kind of, were defining moments for you about, how your experience went in terms of being the only one in the room. And then on the flip side of it, to talk a little bit about that, how that was maybe a benefit. I think I mentioned this when we talked about this earlier about Dr. Tara Yosa has a concept about cultural wealth. So thinking about how being from a minority group or being from that area or that identity would help you persist and be more resilient. So feel free to step in whenever you guys feel like it, but if you could talk a little bit about both sides of the coin, I think that would be a good way for us to kind of start this discussion about it.
I think I have an idea about that, Danielle. I teach economics. And so what I tell students about economics is that it makes smart people not feel so smart. It's a challenging subject in the sense that you have to make your mind pivot, and that's hard for people, especially people that are very engineering or accounting type background in many cases. And so I think that for me, what I've seen over the years is that what keeps the economic departments and economics in general not diverse is the quantitative reputation economics has. And so I think that's the challenge. The opportunity for me at the front of the classroom is I try to not water down, not to pull out the quantitative aspects, but to focus on the common sense part and to focus on the part that is applicable, that makes people want to use economic thinking. So then you can start to see the value in it. And I think that is the opportunity as an instructor standing in front of a room of people, is that you have the opportunity to demonstrate something beyond what its reputation is based upon.
Thanks, Brian. Anyone else want to tackle that one?
I think one of the challenges, at least that I experience, is just the opportunities that are presented throughout my career. I think oftentimes my supervisor looked to individuals that were less tenured to provide opportunities to build their resume out. And it had got to a point where, I guess in my occupation, we have the authority after we go to institutions and we look at several areas, and then we have the responsibility to rate them in these areas and criticize certain areas they need to improve. And just imagine a 22, 23, 24-year-old walking into a small town of an institution telling someone that their grandfather started that bank, where something they didn't do or do right, do wrong or do right. So throughout my time, I think when I had conversations with my supervisor, it got to a point where I was trying to explain the challenges associated with my responsibility, as well as just, trying to live or be employed on, because as part of our responsibility, we travel and we have to spend evenings in some of these smaller towns. So just going to get something to eat came with a challenge. So it got to a point where she mentioned, hey, you need to find someone outside of this institution, outside of this agency as a mentor. And from those discussions, he told me to embrace the ignorance. Use this as your opportunity to share your experiences with some of those individuals, as well as leverage those opportunities to advance. And I think Mr. Thompson mentioned something last week when we first met up. He talked about the confidence and not I guess standing out or feeling like you're the only one in that room. And it took years to build that confidence. But I think once we got past the challenge of I am the only person, and recognize, hey, how can I leverage this and take some of this energy to advance my career and be a voice? I think that's when I started to turn the corner. So I think the challenges come along with it, but also finding ways to leverage those opportunities when they are presented.
So I just wanted to follow on with that, because I never, I think it's important to frame it in a way that these aren't just challenges for us, right? The challenge is also for the person on the other side of the interaction. And so when I walk into a room that I am the only one, and sometimes, I started on Wall Street in 1996. And as a Black woman, when I walked in 1996, I was very rare. It has gotten some better. But I always use it, and primarily I think it's because I came from a family full of educators and social justice activists, that I used those opportunities to educate other people about, while I might be rare, it doesn't mean that I should be rare, right? And so I was talking to someone the other day about an experience that happened to me when I was at Morgan. I was on a flight to Madrid with my boss, and he asked me if I ate chitlins. And I said to him, but you already know that I don't eat pork, right? So now this is my opportunity to use this. I get that it's uncomfortable that you're sitting on this long flight with me, but let me use this as an opportunity to tell you why you don't ask someone that. Because often people in moments of discomfort will say things because they don't know what else to say. And so I use that rather than being angry or upset or thinking there was something wrong with me, let me use this as an opportunity to help this person navigate what is also potentially a challenge for him.
Yeah, I could piggyback on that. In my experience, when I think about as I said, when I was in college, I really felt like I was the only one in the room. I remember being in accounting classes, and there were stereotypes that I had to deal with, right, from professors and from students. I remember my first day in my first accounting class, my professor asked what was the score of the football game and if we won. And he assumed that I was on the football team. I didn't tell him that I played rugby and I actually didn't play football, but I knew, okay, there's some stereotypes. Maybe about 6 months into the school year, I had a fellow classmate, Caucasian lady. She came to me and she said, "Hey, I need to apologize to you." Now, I'd never had any interaction with her. And so she said, "I come from a town in Tennessee where I would have no chance to interact with anyone that was Black." And she said, "Everything that I've been taught that Black people are," she said, "I've been watching you the whole semester." And I was thinking, okay. And she said, "You're nothing like what I was taught." So there's this opportunity to break stereotypes. And that's one piece of it. But what I would say is, at least in my experiences, even going back to high school, I had an opportunity to be in a mostly Black school. I had an opportunity to be in a mostly white school. What it taught me was the ability to connect and relate and communicate with a diverse array of people, right? And so that's something that for young people today, as you think about building your network, and it's going to be critical for your future success in terms of your career, the ability to resonate, communicate, relate to different groups of people is something that was a benefit that came out of some of my experiences that I certainly appreciate now.
I definitely want to add on to everybody. I think that confidence is very key, and right, there's definitely an added value, a benefit of being in the room and being able to create that network just from a Black perspective, right? In America, we were enslaved until 1866. I mean, when I think about my alma mater, it was created in 1776. And so Black people weren't able to be in the room for 100 years. And then into 1960, we couldn't be in the room with other people other than in our Black schools. And so we are always going to have an issue, an insecurity, a lack of confidence that we're going to have to get over about being in the room now that we finally gotten there. And I think that that is one of the key things that we deal with as Black people. And one of the ways that I've overcome it is just that realizing the value that nobody has been able to have, realizing the value nobody's been able to see, right? Once you are in that room, you start to see that diverse perspectives are important and something that in this society we haven't engaged upon. We're starting to unravel that onion right now. But I think that that is a perspective that Black people can really grapple on early, because they're always going to be the diverse perspective. The way that we had to venture into a capitalism was based on the fact that we were diverse. So that would be my answer to that question.
Hey, Ms. Crocker.
Yes. Hi.
Howdy. Thank you for the invitation. The title alone drew me in. So thank you for having this setting. I just want to say that, of course, there are challenges when you're the only one in the room. But in so doing, I think it's good that we show up and not because they hired you or you're there because you qualify. Now, one thing I have found, just getting my degree last year, but I always worked in corporate America. I worked for one of the founding fathers of Pitney Bowes. And one of the things people would always say, what school did you graduate from? So I would say, the University of Illinois. But it was the university of my parents in Illinois. But I'm saying that to say I had to become comfortable even in the 80s working for JP Morgan Chase and then other financiers, because once you're there and you know what you're doing, you're there. It's more or less showtime. And, I wasn't inhibited. I wasn't trying to change my tone. I was authentic and I got a lot of respect. So come into the room, show up, do what you have to do. And of course, there's a dynamic, you have to do more. So showtime, do more. And, just be who you are. Most of the time I have a do not enter look on my face. So I've never been inquired with, any epithets or, any quote unquote Black things. So, and so at any rate, but, I'm very pliable, and open to conversation, but I just haven't had that. Now, of course it exists, but I just haven't had that. And again, when we show up, I'm showing up from those from, Black Omaha, Oklahoma, I'm showing up from my granny, my mom, who's a former judge. So I'm not like shocked because they hired me because I qualify. So, hello.
Yes, I would agree 100%, Lisa. And thank you so much for sharing that. All the panelists mentioned something that I think is really important about creating a community, creating network. And so there's a question in the chat that touched on this about whether there was ever a mentor who fostered inclusion and helped you put your foot in the door, basically, so that you could be in the room. Because I think that's important and something that you all have mentioned. So can we talk a little bit about that?
Well, I think it's important to distinguish that there's mentorship and there's sponsorship. And, I spent 12 years at JP Morgan Investment Management in the private equity group. You can't progress often in large organizations without sponsorship. And you have to understand that a sponsor is someone who is advocating for you to climb the ladder. A mentor is often the person who will pull you to the side and tell you when you're wrong, right? That's not always they don't always play the same role. And so when I think about mentors, often those are professors who introduced me to the professions that I wanted to. The mentor that I found at the University of Chicago is Steve Kaplan, who is probably one of the most well-known finance professors on the planet, someone who wrote my recommendations to go get a PhD. But I wouldn't say he was a sponsor to me, right? Because he wasn't in the organizations championing me inside a room to get promoted. And so those are very different things. And I think we have to understand that we have to have both of them. And sometimes there are relationships with sponsors that may be uncomfortable because you have to find someone within an organization who has the power to sponsor you. And that person does not always look like you, right?
Yeah, I can add to that because I think it's important. What Stephanie's saying, just in terms of the difference between mentors and sponsors, I just want to come back to it because it's something that had I known it when I was getting ready to graduate, that would have been something very important for me to understand. You're going to have allies, you're going to have advocates, you're going to have mentors and sponsors. Those allies are going to jump in the boat with you. They're going to be willing to do the work. Those advocates are going to speak favorable of you when you're not in the room, right? But then those mentors and sponsors, as Stephanie said, it's important because from a mentor perspective, what I find is, particularly being Black in finance, you're going to find that you have more of the mentors. You're going to find more that you have, colleagues, allies. The sponsors is where things start to thin out because those are the people that have the power and influence to give you an opportunity or to give you exposure. And so it's critical that you get that. For me, I had someone early in my career, and this was a good lesson for me to learn because initially I felt like a sponsor or mentor, any of those roles, it needed to be someone that looked like me, right? And early in my career, I had a CFO who was a white male, and I did not give him initially the fairness of thinking that he could understand, the type of journey that I was about to take. Lo and behold, he did understand. And to a point to where he actually would give me responsibilities that at the time I just thought, okay, he's just giving me these responsibilities. But in hindsight, I understood that he gave me a well-rounded skill set from a finance standpoint. And he actually gave me responsibilities that were value-add responsibilities that were critical. I didn't know how critical at the time, but he literally set me up for promotion. And he created a path, and I didn't even fully understand what he was creating for me until after the fact. So I would tell you, it doesn't necessarily have to be someone that looks like you, but definitely understand the difference in those roles because it's going to be critical as you build your network.
Yeah, and I'll jump in. I think it's very important to have good mentors, but not only, they shouldn't just be look like you. I don't want to just have a Black female mentor. I have a lot of different types of mentors. They're male, they're female, they're white, they're Black. And I was taught pretty early on from my parents the importance of mentorship. And I don't think I really understood the meaning of a sponsor until maybe about a year ago, and how important it is to have a sponsor, and a sponsor is someone that will speak on your behalf when you're not in the room. A mentor would also be someone who I can pick up the phone if I was having an interview or I was trying to figure out what type of career was I really interested in, and kind of get a different opinion other than my parents. But they were all very successful individuals, so I really respected their perspective and their advice. So I took it. It was very important to me. But I think I'm glad that we brought up sponsorship, because I don't think not everyone knows the difference between them and how important both of them are in their own ways.
I think I have a slightly different perspective. For me, I had someone, I did an internship at a venture capital firm. So I had somebody that was the ideal mentor, African-American male, very successful, did everything right. But one time we went out to lunch and he told me that I don't eat meat. And he told me that, it's a sign of weakness if you don't eat meat in a business setting. And that stuck with me in the sense that was probably one of the moments that defined for me that I'm a self-directed individual. I'm not someone who's going to be in a big corporation. I'm somebody that kind of sets their own path. And I am surrounded by books that have become my mentor over time. And certainly there's people in my life that, add value in that way. But I've become really good at pulling out the message I need to hear in a book. And so for me, mentorship is really kind of aligned with my self-directed personality, I think.
I think I looked at, sorry, I'll let you go. Sorry.
Well, okay, yeah, I'll go. I think mentorship is also very important. I think sponsorship is important right now. It's my second year at RSM, and now I'm scrambling like, well, where's my sponsor? I need a sponsor to validate the work that I've been able to do or that I have done in the last 2 years. And I think that's why sponsorship is important. But mentorship is really important to me as a Black man growing up on the South Side of Chicago. None of my jobs have been obtained because I sent in an application and it just looked good on paper. No, every single one of my jobs, honestly, I'm very connected with 100 Black men, and I have a mentor named Kenneth Malone, and he's gotten me all of my jobs in Chicago, internship at Chicago Housing Authority. Then he knew a partner at RSM. He reached out to the partner. He gave me their business card. I called him. I followed all my mentor steps, and then I was working at RSM. So I think that your relationships with your mentors are they're just really important for getting through the door, through the door of the corporate space. Because the real reality is when you're talking about getting through the door, in the door of the corporate space, you don't need, I failed financial accounting the first time I took it. Sophomore year, I had to retake it. And so there's a lot of reasons for me to feel insecurity around going into the corporate space. But the only thing I really needed for that is for somebody to find interest in me, to create personal relationships, and all of those things I learned through my mentor. And I don't know, like once you actually get your foot in the door, then you can start to gain sponsorship by doing work and having people validated. But I mean, just don't let any insecurity about how your work ethic is stop you from getting in the door. Get a mentor and have that person help you to get in the door of your professional space, because I think in the beginning, it just matters that you're curious. Okay, that's my answer.
And I think for me, it was finding a mentor within the agency and outside of the agency, specifically outside of it, just trying to better understand how to be a professional, how to navigate the room, how to articulate my thoughts without causing much of an uproar. And then internally, just because I do work for a government agency, it's heavy on networking. And so just having mentors identify how to navigate the politics within the agency, how to advance, how to get certain opportunities. And I think from those relationships, they were able to identify the proper sponsors for me, because I like the way that was broken down, the mentorship and the sponsorship, because I think the vouching within the room that you're not present within has helped me get to a certain position that I'm at now. And now I just try to take advantage of the situation that I'm in, that I do have a chair at the table and I have impact and influence, and what kind of sponsor can I be going forward? So I like the way it was broken down from a mentorship and a sponsorship, and the opportunities both presented. So
Danielle, I just wanted to say one of the things that to the young people that are on is learn the formal and informal channels. I think that's important, and that's what having a mentor will do for you. When I was at Morgan, I sat on the compensation committee for the private bank and investment management. And for those of you who don't understand what that means, in almost every large organization, there's a group who decides how people receive bonuses, right? And so that means this group of people will review all of the evaluations. And then at the end of the year in a financial institution, they're doling out the dollars. And those dollars are often a signal as to whether that person should stay or leave. One of the things is most young people don't understand that what's written on an evaluation is never going to be controversial, because it can have legal implications. It's what's said in the rooms that you aren't in. Those conversations determine how you progress in an organization. And we are always qualified. Everyone's qualified. That's why they're there. The problem is that we don't often know the informal set of rules of engagement in organizations. And those are the things that often lead to us not being successful. And so having a mentor can say, I'll give you an example in the accounting and finance space. In accounting, for example, you have to get put on an engagement, right? People are deciding who gets put on an engagement. Often young people, when they get to the firm, will bring their lunch, right? That's actually a very bad thing, because you need to go out with people to get to know them, for them to choose you for the team. Because if you don't get chosen in the beginning for the team, especially the good teams, you may be relegated to bad engagements. And if you get relegated to enough bad engagements, it starts to appear that you might be the problem. Maybe you didn't get on the engagements because no one knew you to put you on prime assignments. That's the kind of stuff that a mentor will tell a person in an organization. Hey, you need to try and go out to, some of the group social hours, even though you may feel uncomfortable. That's really when business is happening in that organization. And so just keeping that kind of stuff in mind, to everyone's point, it's finding the network, and that network doesn't always look like you.
Oh, thank you guys all for your thoughts on that. I love that we talked about sponsorship. That's something that, even though I'm not in the finance space, I recognized, unfortunately, late in my career, and how important that is. In terms of the students that are on this call and some of the staff and faculty that are working with them, do you guys have any advice? How do you get those sponsors? How do you, kind of find those relationships? Can you share anything that might have been helpful for you, or any advice that you have looking back and, from hindsight, to say, this is what I would have done, or this is what I would recommend?
Make it personal. Make it personal. Get on the calls, make it personal. Get on the calls. When you realize that you're in the room, first of all, you have to realize, I think it's interesting. We never talked about what the room is. This is a room. LinkedIn is a room. DePaul is a room. An email thread with your professor is a room. And all of those different things are rooms. And you want to just take all of those opportunities and make it personal. And especially with the remote environment that we have today, there's just the space to make things personal is just so far away. And so the person that's taking advantage of that, for example, the person who's taking advantage of that is that person that is gonna leave with something after they leave the room, right? And so I think that's just the biggest thing I could say is, get on, if you're on this call right now, personally reply to somebody and say they like, you like what they said. Connect with them after LinkedIn, right? Those are the things, taking value. And I'm sorry, I'm on a soapbox, but when we talk about the Black people and they do not get to be in the room, we have to realize that being in the room is an opportunity. And so you're in the treasure chest right now, take everything you can out of those rooms and spaces when you get it. And you have to really start thinking of it that way. And people don't necessarily realize they're in the room when they are. And it's just a sad feeling. So
I couldn't agree more with what Joseph is saying, is that, like, for me, it's unfortunate to hear from a professor, like, I don't focus on grades. To me, it's not as important as what value is delivered during that time from that 1 quarter class. And, just as somebody who learns to operate a crane, they don't receive a grade, they receive the certification that they can do the job and they can do it well. And to me, that's what the value add is. And so if you can gain value from everyone in the room, me included, your classmates, that is the opportunity when you take a class. It is so, I couldn't remember 3 of the, my class grades in my doctorate program. It's not the focus. The focus is, I walked away from that program with the confidence that I can do and learn anything I want. And with that, that's how I exist.
So Joseph had a really good point about understanding the room. We have multiple rooms. So I was having a conversation with a former student who is starting at a firm. And he said, how do I get to know people? Well, you went to this university, right? So that's a room that you are in, to Joseph's point. Identify the people who have gone to your alma mater, right? Especially if some of them are junior and some of them are senior. Ask them out for coffee. People will give you a 30-minute window of time. For me, I mined the University of Chicago network, which was pretty extensive at Morgan. But there are all other rooms that you might find yourself in. One of my friends who played lacrosse at Harvard, he found all the folks who liked or played lacrosse. Today, he is, a partner at a PE firm, right? It's about, what unique thing do I have? Now let me find the other people that share that with me, and let me go find those people to talk to. Because most people, especially if you've gone to their school, they are very willing to talk to you about their journey. People will start to pour out, and then they will say, oh, have you met so-and-so? And that's how the ball game works, right? And so when they say, oh, you need to reach out to so-and-so over there, you're now emailing or calling that person, and you're saying, hey, Joseph at RSM told me that I should talk to you. I also went to blank blank, and now this person is going to take your call. So at Morgan, we used to call that a warm call, because a warm call means the work has already been laid for you to have a network with that person because you've been referred by someone that person knows. So know what your rooms are and connect with people on the basis of that.
Yeah, one thing I could add to that is just understand that everything won't be an A to B connection. Sometimes you're going to meet someone that is going to be valuable in your network down the road. And so you need to make sure that with every connection, you try to nurture that connection. I know for me personally, I'll give you a perfect example. I remember going to a diversity and inclusion conference in Atlanta. I'm sitting in there with probably 4,000 DE&I professionals. And then there's me, who I have a finance background. I've got a passion for DE&I, and then ultimately, I helped to start a DE&I consulting company. But at the time when I was in that conference, I heard the speaker, Dr. Steve Robbins. He spoke, and it really resonated with me, some of the things that he talked about. So at that point, I said, I need to make sure that I introduce myself to him. Somehow, out of 4,000 people, I need to make sure that I do. Those are the moments that you got to capitalize on, right? Because I didn't really know why, right? Because I just knew there's going to be a reason at some point. Made the introduction. Fast forward, when I went back and I was working at a company called LexisNexis at the time, this is right before George Floyd. This is, we had a ton of things happening in society. And at that point, I wanted to start a platform within the company that we could use. And we ended up calling it Courageous Conversations. There's all kinds of different platforms similar to it. But basically it was everyone meeting and having the opportunity to kind of discuss some of the things that were troubling them. Right? And just being able to bring your whole authentic self to the conversation. Long story short, in order to build that, I ended up reaching out to Dr. Steve Robbins, and one of his books, which is one I'd recommend everyone to read, is called What If, and it's a focus on unconscious bias, ended up being kind of the center stone for the program that I was able to create at LexisNexis. These contacts, you just don't know where they're going to lead. I would say don't limit it. I would tell you that everybody could be something that could, be a valuable impact. I have people reach out to me daily that, they may say, hey, my son or my daughter just graduated and they're thinking about going into the finance space. Can you meet with them and just talk to them about what that looks like or the difference between finance and accounting? And when I have those conversations, the one thing that I always look for is, well, let me find the person that is going to actively engage with me. And then when we hang up, I want to see who's going to reconnect. Some, some don't know. I might have an opportunity right there for them. I had someone reach back not too long ago, and they said, hey, do you have any opportunities or internships that you're aware of in your network? I loved it. And I just so happened to have an opportunity. So we were able to make that connection. And I was just thinking, it's so easy to do that now with social media and with LinkedIn and with all these different platforms to use. So I would definitely say it won't always be A to B, but value each connection.
And one more point to add, I would say learn to be comfortable with initiating. And that is something that I have learned to be comfortable with. And, in high school, I was reaching out to my parents, friends that I didn't even know what I wanted to do yet. But I was like, I can learn something from them. What can I do to prepare now? But not just calling them one time and getting that piece of advice and they'll never hear from me again. I would always follow up. I'd ask, hey, do you mind if I call you every month? And of course they don't say yes, but follow through. If you're going to say you're going to do something, do it. And, come to every conversation with your best. I learned that, each time you talk with someone, I would think of it as an interview. They're trying to, see what type of person you are and try to connect with them on a personal level. And I will say it wasn't always easy. I had to learn to adapt to it and get comfortable with just reaching out and pick up the phone or introducing myself in a room and going up to the career fair. But the more I learned to do it and just get out of my comfort zone, because I'm definitely, I'd say, an introvert. and I would just force myself to do it. And I'm like, all right, you did it. You did that one time, Carrington, do it again. And I would like have to talk to myself. I'm like, you got this. And now it's, people wouldn't necessarily say I'm an introvert. They'd be surprised when I tell them that, but I solely am. I'm definitely kind of more shy at first, but I've learned I can't be shy in the room. I can't. I'll get overlooked. So it's little instances early on in college that it kind of helped me prepare to make it a little bit easier when I'm on a new project, when I'm going to meet with a client. I had to take those experiences because I will always have to, initiate something. And you can't always wait for something to come to you. If you really want something, you got to pick up the phone. You got to show up to the room, do that. And just put your best foot forward each time.
That right there is like, I wanted to, if, we were in a small group, I would have said, preach, girl, because that was the truth right there. And so how I would take that is I always tell people I'm like a socially awkward social butterfly, right? But it takes training to get there so that you can walk into and ask a person that you don't know to go out to coffee, to go, have lunch. This is where participation in student groups often will come in to help you develop the confidence that's necessary to tackle those kinds of things. So participation in NABA, Alpha, MAHA, participation in groups that give you an opportunity to talk to people. One of the things that I used to, when I spent those years in corporate, when I was talking to young people, because I ran the University of Chicago and Northwestern recruiting team, so I would meet lots of the interns. And sometimes culturally, we don't always go out and assert ourselves because we may be afraid of whatever, you fill in the blank, because it's not the same for everyone. The problem is that people are making inferences based on sometimes whether or not you talk, right? It may signal a lack of interest, even if that's not the case. And so we have to think about, how do we let people know our excellence? Because that's what we are, right? We are excellent, but people can't know our level of excellence as long as we don't open our mouths.
I wanted to snap, like say amen. I think you bring up a really good point about reframing the discomfort and leveraging that, because there is in an experience of being the only one in the room, there's that discomfort you're going to have every single time. But how do you utilize that to push you forward? Because it can be a catalyst for you moving forward, and being able to think about it that way instead of, allowing it to put you in a place you don't need to be. You want to move forward. And so how do you do that? I know that we are at 4:52. I know that this conversation is bigger than an hour. And so I have asked all of the panelists if they want to continue this conversation in another session. They will do that. And some of them are going to be available. So we will have more conversation around this. But I wanted to give everyone a chance to at least ask, like a burning question you have. And just for the last 10 minutes of this panel, but also know that we're sending out some resources, some takeaways from this conversation after the event. So if you didn't get that question asked, take a look at some of the resources, or feel free to send me an email and I can always pass it on to the panelists as well. So feel free to unmute yourselves. Please do me a favor and raise your hand, just because I do think it's a lot of folks and I don't want anyone talking over each other. So, but feel free to unmute yourselves and just raise your hand if you do have a question, or if you feel better putting in the chat, you can do that too. Well, I will kick it off with one from the chat. One of the students had one of the questions that came up is, how have you used informational interviews? Because we talked a little bit about sponsorship, mentorship, but have any of you used informational interviews, and how have you kind of used that to push your career forward?
So I think there are two ways that I've used them. In the finance space, at times, depending on the function that you might want to work in, having a graduate degree might be the starting point for entry. And so when I was applying to business school, I went and did informational interviews with a bunch of people that had gone to the places on my short list. So that was one way. I just I didn't grow up in the LinkedIn time. I didn't even grow up really in the personal computer time. But it was just finding people in the organizations who could point me to people. And then when I was getting ready to graduate from business school, just finding people who had worked in the organizations, primarily in the function that I thought I might be interested in, so that I could go and get questions about what do you really do? Because I think often folks don't really understand. People will tell me all the time, I want to be an investment banker. They've heard someone say that. They have no idea what that means, right? People show up in my office at DePaul all the time because they know I worked in private equity, and they'll say, I want to work in VC or PE. And so I'll ask them, well, what does that mean to you? And they have no idea, right? So that's where finding people that you can ask questions who aren't going to sit in judgment, that's how you use them. And that's how I use them, to find out what are these jobs. There's a need to have that, because once you are on an interview, you don't have the luxury all the time of learning. An actual interview, not an informational.
Thank you, Professor Mason. Any other panelists want to add something to that?
Well, I definitely have to add on to Stephanie's comment, because I recently was just talking to somebody that was interested in gaining an experience at RSM, and he studied economics and finance, but he just kind of showed that he wasn't interested in accounting. And I work in process risk and control, so I do internal audit, accounting, audit work. But then he ended up saying, I'm interested in anti-money laundering, though, AML, and to me, that's a function of a set of accounting. It's a part of accounting, not necessarily finance and economics. And from that, I could see that it was a disconnect between business lines and financial service lines, and what economics, finance, and accounting, and how those relate to those different service lines. Right, I'm a good person to ask that question from, on LinkedIn, right? You see a young person, that's a good question to ask. That's something I probably don't have that much way to be your sponsor, but I can definitely shallow up and something like that. And I think that maybe even grabbing some younger people that are in the industry that you want to be in, or around that industry, asking them questions, and throw it on their head and see how they might respond.
Go ahead, John.
So I do have a question about leverage. It's so important to know people, but it can be so difficult and almost intimidating to try to get into the room. And we've talked about follow-up, we've talked about advocacy. But if you want to be the person who's not a CEO, who's not in the C-suite, is there anything you can do to follow up a LinkedIn page, make a connection, and foster inclusion? Really be a part of a group that might make a change. And if you're willing to do that, what could it look like on social media? What could it look like in these chats for alumni and for DePaul? What does change look like to the panel?
So I just want to say, even if you don't want to be the CEO, you should conduct yourself every day at work like you want to be the CEO, right? That was always, because you never know when an opportunity might come for you to do something, right? And so a part of finding an internship program, right, that's going to cultivate your skills, those are the opportunities you can get to start meeting people. And I think it was Carrington and Joseph that talked about follow-up. So let's say you did one of these internship programs, right? Now you've met these people. Did you follow up with an email to them, right? Because now that's your opportunity to get to know this person. While you may not become the CEO of, let's say, McDonald's, you might one day be the CEO of your own firm, right? Because as an entrepreneur, you're going to be running a business, right? There are skills to be developed and networking will be important. So when you think there may be impediments to you getting in the room, you have to find opportunities, inroads, SEO, Jumpstart, these kinds of organizations that will help facilitate that process for you.
I would just add real quick. I think the most, what I tell students too, like if students tell me they're having a tough time in recruiting, my first question is, what do you want? Because if somebody says, to the point that Joseph is making, I'm kind of thinking about investment banking, kind of thinking about sales and trading, and I'm also looking at commercial rotating banking programs, like that person hasn't done any research because those are all very different roles. And so it's really important to know what you want in order for the world to give you what you want.
It's a good point. And one other thing I would add is, as you get your foot in the door with companies, join an employee resource group. It's a great way for you to, one, meet a diverse group of people. Two, if you're passionate about volunteering or, whatever lane that ERG is playing in, that's another way for you to get engaged with the company. For me personally, I helped actually create an African-American network at a company that I was at. And it just because I was there, I was in the Atlanta area, noticed that there wasn't one, started it, and over a course of about 3 years, 150 people joined it. And it gave me opportunities to meet with our CTO, our CEO. I mean, literally the things that came out of it were just abundant. So I would say if you get your foot in the door, step one, find the ERG to be a part of.
One more point to add, if you don't mind. My favorite quote that I've always had in the back of my mind was, growth and comfort can never coexist. And I think this is relatable in school. This is relatable in your jobs and anything. And something that I was taught, if you're too comfortable in a room, then you're in the wrong room. And if you're the smartest person in the room, then you're most definitely in the wrong room. So you can learn and grow from others. And I think you should just have that in the back of your mind in any setting that you're in. What type of room is this for you?
Thank you all. I know it is 5:01. Some of our panelists have graciously offered to stay on if you have some questions, but I always want to be respectful of everyone's time. So if you have to leave or you need to go to another engagement, thank you so much for joining us. I want to at least say thank you to the panelists. Your advice is just amazing, and I hope everyone found some value. I know I did, and I'm not even in finance. So thank you guys for your words and your advice. But again, for those of you who have to leave, feel free to do so. If you want to stay on, and that extends to the panelists, if you want to stay on, feel free to stay on as well.
Thank you. I have to run, but thank you so much. I enjoyed the conversation.
Thanks, Brian.
Bye-bye.
See you all. I also have to run.
Thank you, everyone. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn.
Me
Yep,
too.
and I will send out information for their LinkedIn as well.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Have a good one.
Danielle, I have another few minutes if students still have questions. I guess there are no students though left.
Eloisa.
There may be.
Eloisa had a
more
question.
questions.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. Yes, I am a student. I just wanted to get feedback and advice. I know that we were talking about sponsorships and mentors. And as a person of color, I know that some of you guys mentioned that when you get to that part of, acquiring those kind of people around your table, how can you give advice on how to go above? Someone mentioned about that your sponsors or your mentors will not look like you, and we have to be open to that. How do we go about expanding that? And if we choose not to, is that going to be affecting the relationships we have with everyone? Because for me, as a person of color, I want to relate to someone that looks like me. that has somewhat experienced what I have experienced. So therefore, I want to not look up, but get information or get advice that I can see myself being that person. And being of color, sometimes I get into that dilemma within myself. I'm like, well, I don't want somebody white to tell me how to give me advice in that realm of business or whatever. But how do we go about changing that? And that's
Well,
what
I think that's a really good thing. So I'm going to give you my advice, because I think your question implies that you can only have one, like it's exclusive. You can have multiple mentors, right? And so I think there is room to, so I always say this because, you know, I've been a professor for a while. I have a group of other Black women PhDs in accounting who are the people who I call my big sisters in the profession, right? They are necessary for me to have certain conversations that I can't have with other people. At the end of the day, though, there are other people who have walked the path I want to walk. So even though my quote unquote big sister may be able to give me advice about certain challenges, if she hasn't walked the path that I want to walk, it would be really difficult for her to give me advice, right? It's not about what box that person comes in, right? It's about getting the best advice for the challenge that you are facing, which is why I think there are a multitude of relationships that can be perceived as mentors. So Andre, when he was talking about being out in, you know, the boondocks on this engagement, you know, he probably had to have people that he could have some conversations with about how hard that was just to walk into those spaces. And that's different than a mentor who might help him navigate, you know, the professional challenges of, well, how do you do this, which has nothing to do with how you feel. So I think there's a room to build a book of mentors who kind of help you, you know, navigate through life and the career at the same time.
I 100% agree. And I used to have the similar mindset, is that I need someone that speaks the same language, has the same opinion, truly understands my struggle per se. And, you know, that was definitely beneficial, and it allowed you to vent and get the emotions. But I still needed, as was mentioned, those individuals that walked the path, that knew how to navigate the room, that knew you need to go and take this assignment. You need to go talk to this individual. And so having a diversity of thought allowed me to be a little bit more well-rounded, because you have to have a diverse experiences as well in perspective in order to navigate your career. And so, yeah, having more than one mentor and being open to this outside of the box opinions definitely helped me out a lot.
Oh, and thanks for the question, Eloisa. All right, I know we're past time, so I know Stephanie and Andre have to go, but thank you both for staying on a few minutes to answer that question for Eloisa. I hope that was helpful to you. Naomi, thanks for hanging out with us a little bit longer. Appreciate you. So like I said, I'll send out some information. Please keep a track of, take a look at your email. I'll send that information out within the next day or so.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Take care.